Hi, yes, hi again. Might have to shout.
Party going on.
There's a party going on, so I'll shout over the party. I haven't prepared anything because for this panel, because I spent all my 3 days that Atau gave me as a notice preparing my keynote. But I guess I'm hoping it will come naturally, because we're all naturally interested in pretty much the same field, which is the voice in relation to technology, in relation to so many other things. So I was wondering what to ask and how to start, and hopefully the rest of the participants and audience here will be a bit more vocal about the voice this time round. So we'll open it up to the audience, but just to kick us off, there's a couple of things. One, I was wondering about, because we talk about machine learning and we talk about automated vocality and so on, but Amina and I have also discussed machine listening and machinic listening, which is an important part of the process, because machines may talk and vocalize differently, or similarly, or we can debate that, but also might listen differently as well. And I wanted to start with Amina in asking her about that, because I know it's part of what she's looking at in her project. How do machines listen? Kind of machinic alterity.
Yeah, so I guess sort of the perception of interacting with an AI-enabled synthesized voice is of it. How to start? I would rather say that these machines and these technologies actively listen, whereas they sort of passively respond. But the perception is not always so, in that they are listening all the time, but actually they only speak when they are spoken to, and they respond to very specific requests. And actually, if you're not specific enough with your questions and your your queries, it actually won't manage to sort of process the question. So, and then in turn, that sort of starts to shape the way we interact and use our voices with these kinds of technology. And there are people that say, this is having an effect on children and the way they start to behave in the home and with the family and with their siblings, because of the way these kind of technologies listen, they require very kind of direct inputs, whereas that's not really how we'd kind of interact with each other. But yeah, definitely this idea that they are listening, they are actively listening, but passively responding is something that I think about quite a lot, because obviously they are also processing and listening in different ways, which we don't necessarily know what they're doing with the data of your voice. Once it leaves the body, it's kind of then in this huge network system, and we don't know where it's going and how it's used, and the different kind of control or processing that goes through.
Yeah, but and maybe someone else has to
in having been a singer and worked a lot with composers for many years, and I would do, and somebody would notate that, and then it becomes their sound. It goes on paper and it becomes that composer's sound, and then I'm that singer who can reproduce it. And I felt today quite a bit of an echo of that in a lot of, it was a sort of trying to program me, felt in a sense. But also that sense of, I kept hearing echoes today of us wanting to, in some way, like I was really struck, it was really moving, the personal nature, as you pointed out, of the 4 presentations. And how everybody was, and it's maybe a little bit, I like to use, because I don't program, I find it takes far too much time. I start with Max and then I go, oh God, and then I just go away. So I've started doing things like, to play with my voice, I've started doing things like using all the GRM plugins. And I try to, as much as possible, put myself in an uncanny position and be met by my own voice, but to really respond improvisationally with that. And I found that it is quite difficult well, I actually found it quite easy to give over that control to what was coming back, but that I'm hearing a lot of us wanting to, in some ways, make the AI something that we can control, and that we can humanize, that we're maybe actually trying to make other people. And I just wonder if that might be a very Western way that we go about music making, and that maybe something that's just come up for me. In terms of voice, and what is the voice of that other being?
Also, you know, you are a performer, and you're kind of used to being programmed. You know, you follow the score. It's a set of instructions. It's a bit like you know, you could compare it to an algorithm or programming if you want to, because you are enacting the work, the writing of somebody else's vision, and ideally, they probably want you to follow that score as closely as possible.
But reenacting is also enabling, and I'm interested in how the voice in performance, for example, the way Elaine Mitchener uses the voice, or how the performance is also becomes then, the body of the performer becomes a vessel, or of the machine becomes a vessel for another voice, kind of this ventriloquist almost idea that, but in a positive way, that voice might have been lost in the way Dicky Ball maybe also uses kind of these lost voices that are not famous, it's the opposite of what this technology promises, that, you know, it's just going to keep our pop stars alive or what have you, but kind of give voice to what doesn't have a voice, so as an enabler, which the performer also is.
Just
Zeynet,
yes. I get lost in that last bit, but I just want to follow up on the active listening and agency and passivity. I find AI a very intriguing case for us to look into the artificial construction and contingent constitution of language, whatever that might be. It could be verbal, human language, or otherwise. I mean, if you were to think about it in linguistic terms, right? Or the grammar. And as well as, you know, what speaks, and the conflation of who speaks and what speaks. And also our understanding of human speech as collaborative and emergent. So in a way, it really draws attention to what we take for granted. And it really draws attention to also these notions of distribution, extension of the body, or expansion or distribution, as we're talking about. So in a way, I think that for me, you know, going back to the brilliant presentations, the last panel, most of them draw on new materialisms and human non-human interaction, and that is very much resonant with the idea of active listening, passive listening, but also you know, how you would configure the active positioning or the passive positioning of a discursive voice, right? So in a way, non-response is a valuable thing for you to look into what's happening within that zone. And obviously, AI is, you know, human body and brain has a different plasticity. We can't 100% compare it to the machine neural networks or supervised algorithms. And we don't know, it's lacking transparency, sure. It's a black box at the end of the day. But also, it kind of, you know, generates an interesting space for us to reflect on what we mean by communication, what we mean by interaction, you know, and how we actually incorporate these things that we take for granted in our everyday lives.
Yeah, a real challenge. That's what I was interested in, the challenge of taking something that things that we consider to be so human and so valuable and intimate and personal and special about us as a species, this kind of old Western idea, that now other entities have, and what challenge that presents. And with the listening, it's the same, as in with the speaking as well. Speech is no longer what differentiates us from all the other things. It's not our privilege. So what does that mean? Maybe we should invite some ideas from all these other amazing people.
Hi, my name's Nick. I'm very interested in the ghost in the machine, because much of what was being said today is trying to define what the ghost is through artificial intelligence, through computer programming, and in a sense, it's losing that mystery. And that mystery might be part of the human being, part of the sensations that we experience that makes us interested in music. It's that intangible. We feed in a particular idea or particular command, and we get back the unexpected. Mm-hmm. Are we raising a mirror and saying, yes, I can give that some meaning now? Is it like joining a random set of dots, which is very personal? And that's what I mean by the ghosted machine. Is it a very personal thing of our way of interacting with the technology? Second part, which is about the listening. On the news last night, I don't know if you heard, there was a survey on how people were bringing up their children with Alexa, and how Alexa has become the nanny, and she was reading them stories. Mm-hmm. And just like you suggest, there's this sort of unknown. You know, what is beyond the little device that we have in our home? Who is listening? Mm-hmm. Is Alexa listening? Is she responding? Is there such a thing?
Yes.
As a response.
Well, I have both an Alexa and children, and I've never been able to leave them with them or with it. So I haven't seen the privileges of the benefits of Alexa as a nanny yet to be seen. I'm sorry, Amina, you were going to say something. Oh, just the yes. It was the answer.
It is listening.
It is listening. I mean, the first part was the
Is it personal?
Morphism of the technology.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you put that?
The voice of the dead.
Yeah, yes.
And we often tend to regard that whole area as being a ghost. A ghost is something that we don't understand, that is intangible. But yet we, through religion or through being brought up or in different cultures, we give it a meaning, and it reinforces our present-day existence in our reality. So white noise, I'm thinking about white noise. I mean, there's this whole movement of sound, of people tuning in their radio, listening to voices of the dead, and interpreting those sounds, and maybe even going as far as saying, yes, that was such and such, and this is what they said to me. And it is a mechanical device.
It's interesting because the relationship between death and technology that has come up a few times actually in these presentations, and sound, and there was always a relationship, I think, and every time a new technology is invented, one of the things that kind of seem to fascinate us and we're interested in is in what it has to say about that, or what kind of access it gives to the whether it's death or the other worldly or the afterlife or the ghost, or that other, that uncertain that we don't have access to.
I'm going to blank on the name. Sonic Flux, the recent, Christoph Koch's recent book, and that I think he brings that out, where he sort of says Edison recording making those first recordings is sort of problematizes all of art by just sort of capturing something that's just there all the time, and we're sort of hearing and listening to the world in a very different way as a result. So I think that sort of might be a place to go to look at that.
Hi. I was trying to ground my next challenge or idea for discussion on it's kind of a vision of a future related to voice performance. So take for instance Holly Herndon and Spawn, the new AI system that she's working with to develop all the choir, or to create that amalgamation of voices. So for me, that's like one instance of a tool that will be recurrent and accessible to many other music producers in the near future. So making that assumption, I was interested in your perspectives as, well, experts in both music and AI and all the problematic that goes between both subjects. What is, I mean, of course there's the potential for new aesthetics, for the creation of new aesthetics and new musical genres, and also for disruption of the whole industry and for the means of production to be completely changed. So it's hard for me to pinpoint like a specific question, but I wanted to tap into your understanding of what's next to come based on the emergence and democratization of these tools for voice and music production.
Can I just quickly jump in, because I was thinking about some examples. Just to clarify, I mean, because I'm working on a conception of voice, which is primarily non-vocal and non-verbal, I actually started to think about the intertwined histories of speech synthesis and recognition, and also the use of AI, within the context of media art and experimental music, through actually biosensing technologies and biomusic. For instance, Atao's work is a great inspiration on that note. So I'm interested in like what possibly bodily signals, sounds, noise may say, instead of translating, for instance, any information, how it leads us to an idea of stimulation. But the reason I pointed that out, I was also encouraged to think about direct application of AI in music, vocal music. For instance, I was thinking about Tomomi Adachi, Berlin-based experimental vocalist, and also Jennifer Walsh and Memo Akten, recent collaboration, Ultra Chunk. But also recently, a colleague of mine brought my attention to Laura McCarthy, who is a visual artist who apparently came up with this beautiful idea, Laura becoming Alexa, putting herself in, literally streaming herself, in other people's houses as a human being. So I have been thinking about more direct, applications. And when you look at these works like Jennifer Walsh, for instance, or Tomomi Adachi, there's human labor behind it. So it's not like AI is a self-contained, self-sufficient, completely plastic, monstrous thing. And so there's human labor in it. So if the neural network, to my knowledge, that Memo Akten developed, Jennifer has to train it with specific vocal instructions, and then look at how the neural network is responding to her voice. So you can expand on the musical language, you can expand on the possibilities of collaboration perhaps, but there is a mutual training involved. And it's not completely accidental, it's not completely certain or predestined or preconceived either. So it's it's a mixture, but it's a very valuable question to ask. I'm very curious what's going to happen, but I do believe that we need to consider human labor behind it.
Jenny says that is actually. Jenny says that is like any other improvising collaborator she's had. She's had to, she spent a year recording every single day. So to her, it is the same as having worked with anybody else. And she's done telepathic improvisation across from China to Dublin and stuff. So she's kind of approaching it in as many different ways she can. I'm still not seeing something that makes me go, the AI is doing something here that perhaps another human being who was coming from somewhere completely different might not have done. I just, I would throw that into the mix.
My worry with using these technologies, I mean, I'm sure it will continue and develop and change and evolve, but I'm worried with introducing technology into music, and obviously it's always been there, but in particular AI, is that because it does involve this kind of data processing, it takes everything and makes it into numbers. It kind of flattens everything, and I don't know technical terms to describe this, but I feel as though you lose the kind of extra stuff, which can't be made into a number or then processed. All the kind of things that you could say make us human, you know, these extra sonic. Even if you had all the sensors to gather all the data from the body, you still wouldn't kind of, you'd lose something. And
but it's not about what it's like to be like human, but what else there is about it that has nothing to do with it. I think that's more interesting, rather than how it can, you know, it can sound or look or do what we want or what we already do. I think it's more interesting what it doesn't, what it does that we don't do, or that we don't know what's in there. There's an interesting review in The Wire about Holly Herndon's and her partner's AI child, because I think that's the story behind it, that's their child, and so on, which rips right through the whole project very eloquently and very interestingly, that I recommend reading. Yeah. But maybe we've run out of time. I don't.
Let's take
one
one
more.
question.
Yes. No.
So it's just really add on to your point that I do agree. I sort of agree with both of you there. I think actually, yes, there's the otherness. There, yeah. So I do agree with both points there. I think, yeah, there's the potential of the otherness, but there's also a reductive nature to data. So I would go, I mean, immediately what I think about when you were just talking about is the difference between, because we're talking about sound, the difference between volume that goes from 1 to 10 and actually using a dial that's got the nuance of in between where you can actually choose. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the ways,
Just shout.
a lot of the ways that data is, that we are actually, the interfaces that we're using with data are actually reductive, which goes to the negative side. I think we're...
yeah, maybe some comes down to interface, but for me, you know, music is something which could never ever be fully explained, you know, and that's the quality of it, that it gives you all these like emotions and feelings which actually are not quantifiable. So then I'm not saying we shouldn't explore music and AI, absolutely not. I'm just saying that the exploration of music needs to continue alongside its kind of exploration with technology.
Doesn't it actually make us question what is music then? I mean, that's why I was talking about, when I introduced myself, it was about, I've learned more about what is musicking, if we're to use that phrase, Christopher Small's phrase, but I've learned more about musicking from being in a room with women in their 80s than I have from being in a studio working on us having preconceived ideas and presumptions about what and that I'm interested in where it actually teaches us a little bit more or asks us problematic questions about ourselves. And I think if we let the AI really ask us the questions, we might, and not try to curate ourselves in it, maybe that might be a kind of a way that we sort of allow the reduction side of it. The interfaces will have to come with that.
Yeah, that's right. That's all about agency as well, which has been mentioned before, and the different, because there is a philosophical notion of agency, of course, there's a computer science notion of agency, there's different definitions, but they all kind of touch on this, on the same question, which is, I think, what we've been debating, because it is a question of agency. But also what you mentioned about before is about polyphony, and how, you know, the wonderful students who presented before, and this kind of dilemma of who curates what and who decides and so on, is Bakhtin, who I mentioned before, looked at Dostoevsky's text in that way, how the author is no longer the dominant voice, and the other actors, the author is there, but the actors might even go against the author, and the characters are given their own voice, and whatever happens, happens, really.